Hello, and welcome to the Friendly City Books podcast. My name is Emily. I'm the owner and founder of Friendly City Books in Columbus, Mississippi. And today we are speaking to author Tyriek White. Hi, Tyriek.
Hey, Emily. How you
How's
doing?
it going? I'm good. How are you?
It's going good. It's been a eventful couple of weeks with the book festival, and then
Yes.
checking y'all out, Friendly City in Columbus.
Yeah.
So
We
it's been
had
great.
fun.
Yeah, we had a
Uh,
good time.
Tyriek was at the Mississippi Book Festival in August and then came to Friendly City Books, came to Columbus to hang out with us. And we have been talking about his new book, We Are a Haunting, which is his debut novel, which was your MFA thesis, right?
Right. Yeah. So like
Yeah.
the first two parts of the book, there's three parts, but the first two parts were my thesis for the University of Mississippi MFA program, and yeah. So at that point, it wasn't a complete sort of story, but it was kind of the roots of this book, the core of this book,
Yeah.
and then me and my agent went back and forth to try and like come up with the ending, come up with the conclusion, which I sort of had. I had the image, I had the ending image, or I guess the scene I wanted the story to end on, and so I guess a
Yeah.
lot of the work was like filling that in, and
I have a question about this actually, because the
mm,
ending, not to, I mean, I guess kind of like going in reverse, the,
spoilers.
the ending felt kind of autobiographical. I mean,
Mm,
is it? Or at least I don't know if that's just because there are some details in the ending that I know about you. Like, I know you went to college in California and it
right.
references going to college in California. So, like, how much is it is real, or how much, or are you like, no, this is a character, like, it's inspired by real people and real things, but it's not autobiographical?
Yeah, it's not autobiographical. There's a firm line, but there are elements that I take from my life and from the lives of my family, my friends, typical fiction stuff. But yeah, there's a distinction in terms of what Kali does and his choices versus like what I end up what I end up doing.
Okay.
But there is that connection that you can't really, where it ends and where it begins in terms of like the fiction versus like the autobiographical. Um, it's a very loose space, but there is a line. I feel like Kali is a bit more hard headed than I am, but like just certain small details like that.
Yeah. So he must be a Capricorn, because I'm a Capricorn and I'm very hard headed.
Well, I'm an Aries, so
What's the big trait for Aries?
I guess that we're like fiery and we're like it's either like my way or the highway, which I don't feel like I give that off. I feel like I'm more like Cancer. Like I'm pretty chill, pretty laid back. Hopefully, I don't, I don't know.
But for me, whenever I see like memes on the internet about earth signs, I'm like,
Mm,
yep, that's it.
mm,
That's every single one, dead on.
yeah, very
Well,
level, right?
so you mentioned your character Kali, and so this book is a multi-generation saga, coming of age, and it traces three members of a family: Kali, who's the youngest, his mom Key, and her mother, Kali's grandmother,
Right.
Audrey.
Hmm.
So where did this story first come to life for you?
Um. Well, yeah. There's elements of this book that I've kept with me, you know, a decade plus. You know, um, Kali has always been kind of a character I wanted to write about. Um, this kind of coming of age story. Um, that was the basis of you know this story. I guess kind of revolving around this kid growing up in this working class neighborhood in Brooklyn, and him, kind of figuring out and navigating that space, and also, typical kind of coming of age things. But then, I came here to Mississippi, the and then workshopping. I don't know. One day, this story of Key came to me. So Key's voice came to me, and I just imagined her kind of walking around my neighborhood, being this kind of seer, this kind of prophet figure in this kind of like urban, close knit kind of black and brown community. And it just kind of like, I don't know, it's so interesting to me, to have sort of a character like that exist in a space like that. And for me, I guess the conversation between Kali, this character, this young man I was writing, and then Key, who I newly discovered, kind of began speaking to each other. Um, and it was weird because I didn't, I'm in this program, and, workshop isn't sort of the place you work out kind of these like large, big ideas. For all I knew, I was working on a collection of short stories. So, but through kind of, I don't know, just writing, just embracing this like new voice I was hearing, I kind of began sort of putting together this kind of puzzle, because I realized this wasn't just a coming of age story, but it's a story of the history of a community, the history of a family, the sort of kind of societal effects that kind of color their lives. And for me, I guess the best way to kind of show, the way one person kind of navigates this community, this city, that it couldn't just be this thing that happens in the present. It has to reverberate. It has to kind of give the sensation of walking around with kind of history in your bones, or kind of pacing time in a spatial sense, like walking down a city street and being transported to a place just by looking at, sort of the street sign. And a lot of my community was made up of like, street names who were former kind of, slave masters, or former politicians from, the early 18th, 19th century, slave owners from the 17th century. And in this place where I grew up. So just kind of negotiating the present, and I guess the past that is like imbued in sort of every moment, or every second of kind of existing in this place. If that makes sense.
No, totally. I mean, one thing that is so striking about your book is how crisply detailed it is.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about like walking down the street, I mean, like you are in the shoes of your characters, seeing what they see. It's very rich in details. And when you describe Key as a seer, I mean, that's kind of part is like you're seeing her environment.
All right.
And there's, there's also like these great like Easter eggs for, like throwbacks to the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of see the things that change from one generation to the other, the things that stay the
Right.
same. But, reading this, I haven't lived in New York, but I visited New York a lot. I used to go when I was in college. I went to college in DC, and I would take the Chinatown bus to New York like once a month for a weekend. And like, you really feel like walking those streets.
Right.
So I love how you make the place so rich. And place is something that like Mississippians are obsessed with. especially since you are here in Mississippi now. You probably hear Mississippians talk about what it means to be from Mississippi all the time and what Mississippi is like. And, you know,
Right.
since you went to grad school at the University of Mississippi, there's sure, the legends like Faulkner and Willie
Yeah.
Morris are like people are always talking about. But New York is also a place that has a very rich history with literature and art and music. So what does place mean to you, and like how did that become such a big theme in the book?
Well, place to me is, almost a character. I think about Toni Morrison's jazz, and New York literally becomes a voice in this book, a character in this book. So I come from like, half of the battle for me is setting, is rooting sort of the reader and these characters in like place and how that informs, who they are, their relationships, their interactions. I'm obsessed with place. I'm obsessed with how to populate kind of a story with kind of objects, textures, colors, sounds, smells. Just thinking about the world in as many senses and in as many dimensions as I can. And really writing about New York was influenced by being here in Mississippi. And I've been here for, I guess, like 6 years now. And, writing about New York or writing about any place, sometimes it's difficult because you're like surrounded by it, you're entrenched in it. So sometimes finding the language for it or finding, what makes it special or unique is a bit difficult when you're there. So me being in Mississippi certainly, I think, expanded how I could talk about New York. It gave me liberties. It gave me kind of a lexicon to sort of use. You know, my neighborhood and the community in this book that I write about is, again, largely working class, largely public housing, largely tenements and warehouses and sort of industrial hellscapes. But I try to write about it with kind of a natural sort of attention, especially to the land, because this community, it's, all this kind of urban decay and stuff, but it's on a marsh, it's on marshland, it's on, former swampland. It's across from a bay that leads into the Atlantic Ocean. So just, writing about the ways in which the land kind of informs the place, and vice versa. It's easy to kind of describe a place with its, kind of the details or the folklore of that place. So like, mentioning, the mob bosses or the gangs that used to bury bodies, in the marshes or in the swamplands in this community, like that peppers the place, the scene, the story, that brings it alive, that brings with it a history of or the many histories of the people who exist and live in this place in Brooklyn and East New York. So even paying attention to the land in that sort of way, I think, changed the entire way I wrote about the city. I wrote about this place that I grew up, and I'm super grateful for it.
Yeah. Okay. So your choice of the word peppers just now really hit home for me. I think the whole thing that I've been trying to figure out how to articulate. It feels like all the details of the place are like the seasoning of the book.
Right.
And it makes it taste better. You know, the way that like, and because I come from like Southern cooking, my family's originally from the New Orleans area. So, you know, you
Right.
always start
Mhm.
with onions and bell pepper and
Right.
celery, you know, and it's like, it's not the same if you don't have that stuff.
Right.
Um, and, you know, and some people will get, you know, there's a little bit of trash talk when there's not enough seasoning or spice
Of
in
course.
people's
Of course.
food.
I'm already knowing.
Yeah. So maybe that's what it is. It's like having those details of the
Mhm.
place is like seasoning the
Mhm.
narrative.
Right. Right. Because you would hope, your characters, your story would kind of be the dish or the meal itself, but kind of being able to engage with and interact with the space in which this thing takes place. Yeah, it makes the dish, um, again, it adds more, a stronger kind of, sense to it. Like, instead of just your taste, right now it's texture, now it's smell, now it's the feel of the thing in your mouth, the seasoning of, you know.
Yeah. I mean, look, I was just thinking of there's like one detail in here where you described like Collie's dad's apartment as smelling like red stripe beer and cigarettes or something like that. And just like even like little things like that are so
Right,
specific.
right. And it's a particular thing too, red stripe. Um, a lot of Caribbean folk drink red stripe, so even that adds like a layer of kind of. It allows me to sort of talk about heritage in a way. Um, yeah, it's a lot. I love. But besides character, I think for me it would be character, setting, place, um, and then from there, I think you can kind of come up with it. You can build on a story from just those two like important things. At least for me, that's a big part of my process.
Yeah. So we talked about, you know, you had Collie and then you started hearing Key's voice.
Mm,
When did Audrey come into play for you?
it's a good question. Um, I think the more and more that Kali and Key, um, I kept going back and forth. Sort of realized I needed, a bit of a, because the frame, it's a bit of a frame narrative, right? I mean, in a very loose sense, because they're both sort of talking. If you think of these chapters as them talking back and forth, right? Kind of needed a means in which to talk about sort of them both in the scope of this kind of larger thing. I think Audrey came about because I wanted to talk about how they came to New York, how this family got to New York City. And it's largely, the Great Migration. And that gave me a chance to kind of, explore this family tree. It kind of gave me a chance to explore, where my grandmother, the kind of place that she grew up in. It allowed me to, again, sort of reach, back into time and also reach across sort of space and that connection with the South. Um, so while this is very much a New York story, it's a working class story. It's a Black American story. It's, mainly because the Great Migration, is such a pivotal part for, families who grew up in the Northeast and the Midwest, out West. A lot of it is due to the waves of Black folk came from the South. Of working folk who came to the North to find work, to find jobs, to find a means to create better lives for their families. Um, and that's it's such a core part of, not only my family but this this very American family in the story. Um, so yeah, it was important. It was important to me to have Audrey kind of deal with or be the I guess the vehicle in which to see how Kali and how Key kind of engage with the world as like, New Yorkers, as like people born in this community. But Audrey kind of has this a bit of a larger kind of scope of, because she grew up in the South. She moved. She came to New York. She built a life here. She sees the differences between the two places, and she also has been alive enough or long enough to be pushed out of both places for different reasons. But so yeah, I wish I could place when exactly Audrey came to me, but that conversation between Key and Kali definitely created a need for her, and she kept popping up. You know, listen, a southern grandmother, more likely than not, is going to pop up um, in a story by me, or most black folk, most working folk. The matriarch of the family. You know,
Oh
is
yeah.
is one that just is going to keep appearing. It's gonna have an indelible effect on that family, and yeah, I just wanted to get inside her mind and kind of write from that perspective. And it was fun.
Yeah, Southern grandmas are a big deal. I'm literally named after my dad's mother.
Oh,
Her
really?
name is also Emily. And when I talk about like, learning how to cook with the Holy Trinity, like she's the one who I think of, and
Right.
like looking over the gumbo pot, like looking over her
Hmm.
shoulder while she's making a pot of gumbo. Like
Hmm.
that's who she was for me.
Right.
Um, and then as you were talking about the Great Migration, it reminded me of like one of my favorite works of art that I was introduced to it in college, which is Jacob Lawrence's Great Migration series.
Yeah.
And, it's a series of dozens and dozens of paintings, and
Right.
half of them are in Washington, D.C., and the other half are in New York at either the Whitney or MoMA. I forget which one, but this leads me to a segue to the character Kali gets this internship at MoMA at the
Hmm.
Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I thought there was some really interesting social commentary there
Hmm.
because, I, before I had a bookstore, I
Hmm.
worked for a company that had a really robust DEI initiative for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Hmm.
And when I was seeing, things unfold for Kali at MoMA, it to me was such a lesson in when you just have diversity, but not the inclusion side of
Right.
things.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit more about like why you placed him in this place and what you're trying to say instead of what I think you're trying to say?
Yeah. I think. Well, mainly it started as a kind of juxtaposition to, I guess, Kali's immediate material reality. Um, from the edge, from living in the edge of empire to literally, busing or being sent to the center of empire. Um, in fact, one of the many institutions used to sort of reproduce empire and power, um, museums. Um, and I thought it would be interesting. Um, Firstly, that initial kind of juxtaposition or that contrast. Then there was the layer of kind of grief and the way we use art and other kind of forms of media to, help ourselves grieve, or, the sort of that process of feeling something deeply about a piece of art, and how being seen or how being related to kind of helps grief or helps navigate grief. Um, and then, sort of on a third level, is this kind of structural commentary on, or meta commentary on, kind of how we view um, art from certain places and certain communities. Um, so you have these moments where, um, Kali is kind of taking in, you know, um, cultural productions and artwork from, these kind of contemporary American artists. And I guess he's trying to locate himself, much like, many sort of disenfranchised artists or artists from oppressed groups try and find. So he's trying to locate himself. Um, and often he finds himself in sort of pieces or moments that kind of um, reflect, I guess, his reality. So, he connects to the pieces of violence. He connects to kind of the pieces about, working folk. He connects to sort of these pieces that question or push back against African or African American identity. Um, it's really a meta commentary for me to just kind of like talk shit about art and and kind of like my place as an author and as an artist, and kind of Western institutions and how they view, because especially, you know um, me coming from, first generation, uh, college, working class family, grew up in public housing. Um, Typically, the kind of art that I produce, or people would think that I would produce, um, is, you know, of course you have, the sort of greats who wrote about like working people, who wrote about poor people. Again, Toni Morrison, Raymond Carver, Gloria Naylor. Um, but I think sometimes there's this fear or anxiety, at least for me, that like my work isn't gonna be accepted the same way by the academy or by like my peers, because of um just the insecurity that like I didn't come from, you know a family of academics, or a family of, people entrenched in certain social movements, or things like that. I come from a very very uh, working class, underclass even sort of family. And for me, navigating that um, is always going to show itself in the things that I write. Um, and I don't want to ever have fear um, about something that I produce, that it won't be accepted by kind of institutional powers or institutional forces. Um, I think part of it is just making the stuff, and being truthful about, you know, the stories you want to tell and where you come from, um, and not worrying about kind of where it sits or where it lands in the zeitgeist or the larger academy, and all that. If that makes sense. So a lot of it is very meta, kind of me just worried.
I mean, we're having a lot of conversations about this in book publishing these days. And I think, people are realizing that we need to open more doors, because every story is important. Every story is valuable. And there are audiences out there who see themselves in books. When they see themselves in a book, it means something really special.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't just all want to like sit around reading like a comedy of manners with like rich white people from, like the Victorian era all the time.
Right.
Um, like real people's everyday stories import just as much meaning and deserve to be preserved and shared
Mm-hmm.
as much as any other story.
Right.
So, on that note, I mean, I think this is a good time to share with our audience who is listening that we want to get this story in your hands. We want to get Tyriek's book into more people's hands. And so we are sponsoring a book giveaway for We Are a Haunting. And the first 8 people, while supplies last, who go on friendlycitybooks.com/shop and get We Are Haunting, if you use the promo code HAUNTING, we will send you a free copy of the book. It's been signed and we will include shipping. But we've just got a limited supply of that, but take us up on it. We'd love for y'all to read this book and we want to hear what you think. So, after you sign up for it, I will have your contact information and I might be following up with you. Just be like, hey, what'd you think about that book? I've really enjoyed reading it. And, I have more to ask, but I would love to, we've kind of deconstructed the book a little bit. I want to talk about you a little bit more.
Sure.
How did you get here? I'm sure you get asked every day walking around Mississippi, why did you come here from New York? So what is your story?
Yeah. So I came here. Well, first, I have to say, I went to, as we kind of talked about before, I went to undergrad in California, versus me kind of being born in Brooklyn, growing up in Brooklyn for, I guess, 18 years at that point. And so by the time I like went across the country for college, and I came back, I was like, I don't really mind being anywhere. I've always, I foster a deep sense of community, especially for where I come from. But at the same time, I get excited about forming communities in other places as well. So, the prospect of coming to Mississippi wasn't as like daunting as, it might have seemed. I mean, yeah, it's the initial kind of like, wow, okay, I'm going to Mississippi. All right. There's that kind of initial thought or kind of concern. But for me, it wasn't that big of a deal. I'd been going to various writing workshops, just trying to, trying to get myself published, trying to, become a writer. And, a lot of people suggested to me that I should do an MFA program. And so I applied to a few places, and it was a choice between staying in New York and moving to Mississippi. The place in New York, there was Victor Lavelle taught this one particular place. So I was excited about that. And then you had down here, it was KSA Lehman. And it was a hard choice for me. But at the end of the day, I think me sort of reading heavy in like a night and kind of reading KSA's other works, his essays. I think for me, it was, he kind of writes the way I've wanted to write, in a sense that it's very raw, it's very stripped down, yet it's very it's like powerful, and it's incredible what he does. So my choice to come down here, and the rest of the faculty, you know, Derek, the head of the program at the time, you know, took me in like family. He's very transparent in the process leading up to it, and it just made me feel um, accepted and wanted. Um, so yeah, so coming down here, um, it was, again, it was daunting more so for like my family and my friends. But, like, having friends tell me like, yo, so, I don't think we could visit you down there. And me being like, word, like, that's how y'all feel. And then my family, who, they're used to me going off. You went off to California, so like now you're going off to Mississippi. Like, okay, well, you know, um, let's help you. So my mom actually came down with me.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, it was cool. And my aunt, and
Oh,
we
it's a
we
family affair.
yeah we hung out for a while. Um, we stayed at like the Graduate.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. I love that hotel.
yeah, yeah. So they seen the town, they seen Oxford, and again, you know, my mother's my mother and aunt, their mother is from the South. They're from North Carolina. And again, while that's not Mississippi, it's not the Deep South. It sort of it brought back, for them at least, it being with them, it brought back a lot of memories. Um,
Yeah.
they were like, why couldn't we have raised you down here? Because, all the men be like, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And I just didn't get that. Um,
Home
Now I'm
training. No.
trying. Yeah, yeah, good old home trainer. They were like, why don't you have home trainer?
Well,
But
it's funny you mentioned them being from North Carolina and kind, like feeling pretty comfortable around here because
mm,
I went to grad school in North Carolina, and it was after I'd been
mm,
living out of state in the north in Washington, in the north, quote unquote,
mm,
in Washington D.C. for like a
yeah,
decade. I was like, I think I want to go home, but like I I need to kind of like feel it out. So I was like,
right,
you know where I'm gonna go? North Carolina, because it's like in the middle of the Venn diagram of
right.
like, the kind of old South, but like lots of, it's really dynamic with all the people who have been moving down from the North.
hmm
So yeah, North Carolina's good.
Yeah, it's a good barometer of,
Yeah.
you know.
And you also mentioned when you were talking about coming to Mississippi, in addition to Kiesa Layman, Derek Harriel, who is a poet who's at the University of Mississippi. And I just want to like give a little shout out to him while we're here because he is one of the best readers I have ever experienced.
hmm
I love listening to him read his poetry, but like he could read the phone book and I would be just as into it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. And Kiesa like has probably been the greatest ambassador for the state of Mississippi we could have. And
hmm
one thing that really stands out to me is not only how talented he is, he's obviously super, super, super talented, but he's so generous. And I see him paying it forward in so many ways with younger writers.
So many. Listen, without Key, like I don't even, because so Kiese was my thesis advisor, right? Him, uh, I forget, Tommy Franklin was on it. Ethel Skurlock was on it. But Kiese was my thesis advisor, and without him, kind of, you know, me submitting my thesis and him telling me, "Yo, it's ready. You should start shopping it around." That sort of, because like us, especially, growing, developing writers, like, you don't know when a thing is ready or a thing is finished, not finished, ready. Is it ready to be kind of published in this arbitrary sense of like, the mainstream publishing industry. But him giving me that stamp, him using his connections to help me out. Um, I only found my agent through him. He sent my thesis uh, to Janklow and Nesbitt and opened so many doors for me. He blurred my book. He had this tour date with me in Houston, but things came up. But the lengths in which he has gone to kind of help me, to put me in position to pay it forward, as you said, is, I could never find the words to sort of thank him, to show him how much I appreciate it, and how much other kind of young writers, even older older writers, sort of appreciate the way he kind of puts himself out there. Um, and it teaches me, and it shows the rest of us kind of how to pay it forward, how that looks, what that looks like. And yeah, I hope. Sorry, I'm getting a little
No, I mean,
choked
well,
up. But
I see you doing that in the work that you're doing with Lampblack Lit. So let's talk about that a little bit. Lampblack Lit, nonprofit organization that is helping emerging Black writers get out there with like kind of publicity and marketing support, but also mutual aid.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit more about what you've been doing with that?
Right. Yeah. So, Lampblack started in 2020, initially to provide micro grants and funding for writers during the pandemic, mainly emerging writers. And through that, we've been able to, give hundreds to thousands of dollars to writers in need. And then post pandemic, able to kind of, form sort of many avenues in which we can do that. So, as we kind of talked about earlier, we were able to begin a literary journal, for which the proceeds go directly to that mutual aid program. Right now, we have a reading series every month at MOCADA, the Museum of Caribbean Arts in the African diaspora. And we're able to kind of, donations from that, get turned into funds for the mutual aid program. So just having programming that like not only kind of amplifies and highlights, Black and brown voices, we're also able to kind of, raise money to give back in a sense. And all these things we pay. I ain't gonna throw no shade, but even like I was in the last issue of Lampblack magazine. We're on our third issue, and I was in the second, along with Carl Phillips, John Keane, incredible lineup. But I got paid more from that than in certain other kind of things, and even the reading series. So we pay everyone who participates in these programs, and we're extremely proud of the mutual aid program. And yeah, we were talking about kind of this issue, this third issue of Lampblack magazine, the labor issue.
Yeah, it's funny. We're recording this conversation on Labor Day. So you've got a labor issue.
Come on.
Of Lampblack, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we knew what we were doing. But yeah, we're excited about that, and kind of having these sort of kind of periodicals centered around kind of not necessarily radical themes, but like investigating these kind of so the labor issue is talking about kind of the neglect of the working class in America, the kind of the labor that we do as working folk, as Black folk, um, and kind of like the literature that comes around that, the literature, the poetry that comes or that deals with kind of, you know, this labor force or Black bodies as this force of labor, this free force of labor, the emotional labor of sort of existing in this country, of constantly having to kind of be this voice or this censoring or guiding kind of voice for like equality or or any of these things, and the pressure that comes with that.
Yeah.
Um,
We actually
yeah.
have another podcast coming up with the author of a book called Emotional Labor.
Mm.
So we're going to spend another like hour just talking about this. Her name is Rose Hackman.
Okay.
So yeah, speaking of emotional labor,
Excited
I
about
mean,
that.
yeah, but especially like, you know, the expectation of having to perform all the time and
Mm.
having to edit yourself to make
Right.
other people feel good.
Right.
And that's also, I mean, that's a big thing here in Mississippi and here in the South. I feel
Mm.
like um, a lot of interactions involve a lot. You're talking about the whole like yes ma'am, no ma'am thing. I mean, that is part of it. Um, there's
Right.
this, yeah, there's a lot of emotional labor that happens. And I'm also feeling it now working in a retail environment because I used
Mm.
to have like office jobs before I decided to start a bookstore.
Yeah.
And that has been such a big difference between what I used to do and what I do now. And realizing, you know, I have kind of like the luxury of doing this in a bookstore. But you know, I'll see comments on Facebook all the time about what their service was like at McDonald's or Walmart or like whatever restaurant. And there was a
Mm.
whole debate once about tipping, and it was
Mm.
crazy. Some of the things that people were saying. And I was like,
Right.
I don't know if you really want to put that out there with your name on it.
Well,
Uh,
but bookstores are so incredible in that, yes, they're retail spaces, but also they're these like community spaces that, you know, contain like serious resources that can be places of education and organizing. Like, you know, it is a retail space that can fall to reviews and like, you know, all the outside stuff, but it's so important, it's so valuable, and that kind of, I don't know, it's an interesting balance, you know, to be a retail space, but to also like, you know, have all this stuff that you can offer to a community. And I guess,
yeah.
how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's hard, especially, you know, we ask people to pay full price on a book, and that is still a big thing. But that's what helps us do this kind of thing. That's what helps us do this community building. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, you know, that resonates with a lot of people.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, we're really excited to do more with you and more with Lampblack to promote what y'all are doing.
Thank you.
And we want to just remind everybody, encourage everyone to take advantage of this opportunity to get a free copy. If you already have a copy, maybe you do because you're listening to our podcast, get a free copy for someone you know who might not be able to get one for themselves or who you think might like this book. We really encourage getting students, you know, high school students, college students, access to books. So maybe you know, an 18-year-old in your life who needs this book right now. So go to friendlycitybooks.com/shop and use the code HAUNTING, and you can get a free copy of the book while supplies last. And Tyreek, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, happy Labor Day.
Thank you. This is a great conversation. I miss celebrating Labor Day. Do y'all have? Does Mississippi have any like parades or celebrations for
Well,
Labor Day?
Not for Labor Day. I am from the part of Mississippi that celebrates Mardi Gras. So
Oh,
on the coast, yeah, I grew up an
yeah,
hour
yeah,
away from New Orleans. So we had Mardi Gras parades and we would straight up get like almost a full week off of school for Mardi Gras.
yeah.
Um, but no, Mississippi is, they call it a right to work state. So there's not a lot of organized labor here. But I will say, just to brag on my family for a second, my dad was a lifelong Boilermaker, and
Mm,
he was the president of his local in Memphis for several
mm,
years.
okay.
So I do come from a labor family, and you do find some
Same.
people who are in the trades who are in unions here,
Yeah,
but or federal government, but that's pretty much it,
yeah.
because not like even our teachers, it's actually illegal to organize in the state
Wow.
of Mississippi. Yeah, that happened in the 80s.
Mm,
There was during kind of the union busting phase,
hmm.
the teachers were presented with an ultimatum where if they did not give up their right to organize, they would lose their pensions.
Wow.
So, yeah. Yeah. And
Oh my God.
there's a lot of, historical context too,
Hmm.
with all of this. But yeah, so I will say though that, there are organizing efforts going on in
Hmm.
Mississippi.
Hmm.
And especially, I mean, and you probably see this too. I think like our generation has become like really open to the idea and like
For
really
sure.
accepting of it.
Right.
So I feel like, unions kind of went down for a little bit, but I feel like they're on the rise again.
It's a surge. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a surge, I think.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
So that's the story of Labor Day here, but maybe it'll be a bigger thing. Maybe we start a Labor Day celebration.
Needs to be a bigger thing.
Yeah.
Especially here, you know.
Yeah. Well, awesome. What about you? I mean, since you brought up that question, I mean, do you have a Labor Day thing in New York?
Yeah,
Really?
There's a whole West Indian Day parade on Labor Day, mainly because of, you know, the union movements, but it's kind of crossed with kind of like the immigration of West Indian folk, and they were, um, you know, they were heavily involved in labor movements. So there's an entire parade on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn. It's pretty incredible. Um, but then now this year they're like testing out kind of uh, these drones. The police department is testing out these drones for to surveil kind of like backyard parties and the such affiliated with Labor Day parade and Juve events. Yeah, it's weird. It's very weird, but
Yeah, but New York does have this really cool tradition of all the different like ethnic groups who
mm,
are part of the fabric of New York City. Like all seem to have like a day and a parade to celebrate because
yeah.
just like from seeing the news or like even like on just like TV,
Hmm.
like you usually see it get covered in the New York Times every year, for example. Like you see like the different days. So like,
Hmm.
were there any other like really cool like celebrations like where you're from in Brooklyn?
Uh,
Or let
hmm,
me ask you, did y'all do anything for Juneteenth like before it was a federal holiday?
no. I mean, maybe before, and when I was a kid, and like I didn't know what was going on. Like an older person just took me to some cookout or something. Um, but no, like as long as I've been cognitive of Juneteenth and what it's meant to us, no, I don't think there's like a large organized like now. I think so the Weeksville Heritage Center, which is this place in Brooklyn. So Weeksville was a community in Brooklyn during slavery that was full of basically freemen. It was a free kind of community, and it's been preserved and kind of turned into like a museum cultural space. So now I think they do kind of Juneteenth, cookouts, block party filled with like events and panels and stuff like that. But no, for as long as I can remember, I don't think there was like a large scale Juneteenth celebration in New York until probably, very recently.
Yeah, I didn't grow up with it, but when I moved here, there is a Juneteenth celebration that had its 20-year anniversary this year. So that was really cool to learn that they had been doing it for so long here. And we also have this thing here that's really unique called the 8th of May. And so, what I think is kind of cool about this is, with Juneteenth, like the point of celebrating that day is because that's like when this one group in, I can't remember what city in Texas, but it's like the news made it to Texas. They like finally,
Galveston.
Yes, thank you, Galveston. There we go. But it's like it kind of like took this like train, sort of like the Pony Express, I guess, to get from like DC to Texas.
Yeah.
And in Mississippi, at least in Columbus, Mississippi, when when people learned that, when it was enforced that people were free, was on May 8th. And so May 8th is our Juneteenth. And I would really encourage like other communities to figure out like what's your Juneteenth, because it may not be June 19th. It could be a different day. And like that's also like a cool piece of history.
Yeah. Right. That's cool. That's a great idea.
Well, you have an open invitation on it's always May 8th, 2024. Actually there's a high school history teacher here, Chuck Yarbrough, who organizes an annual event on the 8th of May that local high school students organize and perform in. So you've got to come. Ralph Eubanks came last year, so you and Ralph can ride down from Oxford.
I would love to. I didn't even know about that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Awesome. Well, we'll be seeing more of you then.
For sure. Definitely.
I'm
around.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us today.
Of course. Again, thank you for inviting me. Are we still recording? Or?
We are still recording, but I'm going to cut it off here, and I'm going to sign off with our usual sign off. And we always say happy reading. So happy reading.